All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling ultrasound physics. You sent over some really interesting stuff focusing on sound intensities and how sound interacts with, all the different media.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah, we'll be answering questions like, what is that half value layer thickness thing and why does it even matter?
It all comes down to the journey of a sound wave, how it travels, what gets in the way. I mean, understanding this is key to really understanding what those ultrasound images are showing us, right?
Okay, so first up, intensities. The source material uses this light bulb analogy. And I have to say, it kind of clicked for me. It explains how temporal peak intensity is like that really bright flash you get when you first flip the switch on,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
like that initial burst.
And then you have temporal average intensity, which is like measuring the overall brightness of the bulb over time. So it's not just about that initial burst, but the average output.
Got it, got it. And then there's this other one, pulsed average intensity. Is that kind of like, say, measuring the brightness of a firefly, but only when it's actually flashing?
That's a fantastic way to put it. Pulsed average intensity is all about those pulses of sound. It ignores those quiet periods in between.
Okay, now the source throws in this formula. Temporal average intensity equals duty factor multiplied by temporal peak intensity. To be honest, duty factor sounded a bit like technical jargon to me at first, but then, they explain it's basically how much of the time the sound is actually on, like the ratio of flashing time to total time for our firefly.
Exactly, exactly. It's a
Yeah.
core concept, that duty factor. It helps us understand the relationship between the different intensity measurements.
Right.
It also helps us make sense of those conversion rules that the source provides, which are super important for problem solving.
Yeah. Yeah, the source walks us through an example problem using those rules, and seeing it in action really made it click for me.
There's nothing like a good example, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And what's really interesting is how the source then takes us from intensities to the sound wave's journey through the body.
Right, that's where attenuation comes in. I like how they compare it to shouting across a field versus whispering in a quiet room.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. In both cases, the sound is losing energy as it travels. So the key takeaway here is that attenuation is that decrease in intensity and amplitude as sound travels.
So it's unavoidable.
Yeah,
Okay. Now, attenuation is measured in decibels, right? Doesn't that connect back to what we were talking about with the intensity ratios?
absolutely. Decibels give us a way to express those ratios on a logarithmic scale.
Okay,
A 3 dB decrease, for instance, means the intensity has been cut in half.
got it. So attenuation is affected by distance, but the source mentions that frequency plays a role too, right?
Right, and this is crucial. Higher frequency sound waves experience greater attenuation as they travel. So that's why choosing the right ultrasound frequency is so important. You're trying to balance getting a clear image, which higher frequencies are good for, with being able to see deep enough into the body.
Ah, so it's a trade-off, like choosing between a spotlight, that's really bright but narrow versus a floodlight that covers more area but isn't as intense.
Exactly.
Okay. And that leads us to this concept of half-value layer thickness, which the source defines as the depth at which the ultrasound signal loses half its strength.
Exactly. It's a measure of how far that sound can effectively travel through a particular material. And clinically, this half-value layer thickness typically falls somewhere between zero point 0.3 and 1 centimeter.
Okay, so understanding this value helps technicians choose the right frequency to see the target organ clearly. They got to balance the detail with how deep the waves need to penetrate. But I'm curious, how do ultrasound machines actually deal with this attenuation problem? Does the sound just fade away at deeper levels?
That's a great question. That's where the technology comes in. Ultrasound machines use something called time gain compensation to deal with that.
Time gain compensation. Okay. That sounds kind of complicated. Is it like the machine has like a built-in volume knob or something that adjusts as the sound goes deeper?
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah, it basically boosts the strength of the returning echoes from those deeper structures to compensate for the attenuation they've experienced. So yeah, it's like turning up the volume on those fainter signals, to give us a more even image.
So without TGC, the deeper parts of the image would just be like super dark and hard to see.
Exactly. TGC is essential for getting a clear view, and it highlights another really fascinating aspect of attenuation. It's not just about, the depth, it's also about the type of tissue the sound's traveling through.
Oh, so different tissues can affect the sound wave in different ways. I guess that makes sense. It's like how shouting through, a thick forest is harder than shouting across an open field.
Precisely. And that's why ultrasound images sometimes have those shadowy areas. It's because certain structures are absorbing or reflecting more of those sound waves.
It's like they're casting these acoustic shadows because the sound waves just can't get through as easily. That's a really cool way to visualize it.
It is, and that's why understanding attenuation is so important for interpreting those ultrasound images, correctly. It helps us tell the difference between different types of tissue and spot anything that might be, out of the ordinary.
Hmm. This makes me realize just how much actually goes into creating a clear ultrasound image. It's like a delicate dance between, the frequency and the attenuation and all the unique properties of each tissue.
Yeah, it really is, and that's why understanding the physics behind it all is so crucial. Both for the people who are operating the ultrasound machines and the researchers who are developing new technologies, to use it.
Speaking of new technologies, the source mentioned that researchers are exploring ways to even better compensate for attenuation. Like, what are some of the areas they're focusing on?
Well, one exciting avenue is advanced beam forming, and this is all about manipulating those ultrasound beams in more sophisticated ways to improve focus and penetration.
So it's like giving those sound waves a more precise steering wheel, I guess, to navigate through all the different tissues.
Exactly. Yeah, another promising area is the use of contrast agents. And these are substances that are injected into the bloodstream and can make certain tissues or structures more reflective. So they kind of stand out more in the image.
Ah, so it's like adding like a bit of highlighting to specific areas.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that these contrast agents can be designed to target very specific types of cells or tissues. So, this opens up a whole world of possibilities, from detecting tumors to monitoring blood flow and all sorts of things.
Wow, so it sounds like the future of ultrasound is full of possibilities.
It definitely is. And as we learn more about the underlying physics, who knows what other breakthroughs are out there.
Okay, so we've covered intensities, attenuation, and even glimpsed into the future of ultrasound. But before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something the source mentioned about decibels and logarithmic scales. It kind of went over my head a bit, to be honest.
Sure, sure. It is a bit of a mind bend, but it's really about making those really big numbers more manageable. Essentially, a logarithmic scale allows us to represent, very large or very small numbers in a more compact way.
So instead of dealing with these numbers that have like a ton of zeros, we can use this more condensed scale.
Exactly. And when it comes to decibels, they're specifically designed to represent ratios of sound intensity. So the key thing to remember here is that a 10 dB increase means the intensity has actually increased tenfold. So if one sound is 20 dB louder than another sound, it's actually 100 times more intense.
Whoa, I never realized that. So even like a small change in decibels can represent a huge difference in actual sound energy.
Exactly. And that's why, decibels are such a powerful tool for measuring and understanding sound intensity and its impact.
This deep dive has been awesome. I feel like I've learned so much about ultrasound physics.
It's been my pleasure. It's always fascinating to see how these principles of physics translate into these incredible technologies, that are used every day to help people.
Now, before we wrap up completely, there's one final thought-provoking question I want to leave our listeners with. We've learned that attenuation is like this toll that sound waves have to pay as they travel through, different media. But what if we could like bypass that toll completely? Could we one day create ultrasound waves that don't attenuate as much, and maybe, that would give us even clearer images and the ability to see even deeper into the body?
That's a really fascinating question. And I think it speaks to the ongoing quest in ultrasound research. While completely eliminating attenuation might seem like, science fiction, researchers are always looking for ways to minimize its impact and push the boundaries of what's possible.
So maybe it's not about getting rid of the toll booth entirely, but just finding ways to make it less expensive to pass through.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And the research into, advanced beamforming and contrast agents, like we were talking about earlier, are great examples of that. These techniques are all about finding these clever ways to work around the limitations imposed by attenuation.
It's pretty amazing to think about what the future of ultrasound might hold.
Absolutely. As we continue to unlock those secrets of sound and how it interacts with the world, who knows what kind of incredible advancements we might see.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of ultrasound physics. We've covered a lot today, from intensities and duty factors to attenuation and half-value layer thickness.
Yeah, we've seen how those sound waves, travel through different tissues, how frequency and distance play a role in attenuation. And we even got a glimpse of some of the exciting possibilities that are out there, for the future of ultrasound technology.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I want to thank you for being such a great guide.
The pleasure was all mine. I always enjoy exploring these concepts, especially with someone who's so curious and engaged.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've gained a newfound appreciation for the intricate world of ultrasound physics and the incredible ways it's used to explore the human body. Until next time, keep asking those questions and keep learning.